Hello, one and all, and welcome to the first episode of the year of Top Deck Thoughts. For those who, if this is their first time watching this type of content, what Top Deck Thoughts is usually my bi-weekly or even sometimes monthly video where I talk about my 2 cents on some current issues that are happening within either card games as well as Magic the Gathering in general. So, nevertheless, first one I will talk about a little bit that is non-card game related is the fact of Microsoft acquiring Blizzard or Activision Blizzard for $70 billion. That's a lot, and the reason why I'm talking about it is the factor that technically Activision Blizzard owns Hearthstone. It's a card game I play on the side just casually and such, so thought it would be neat to mention them in there. Honestly, I don't really have much thoughts other than that's a lot of money. And I just hope for better work ethic as well as work quality for people to essentially better work environments, since as many people have been seeing the news, Activision Blizzard has not been the most ethical regarding to their work environments, specifically with harassment, crunch, and bleh. So maybe this deal, at least this essentially buyout, could potentially help that aspect, or at the very least get Bobby Kotick out of the door. Other than that, I do also just essentially am still a little concerned because this is kind of making Microsoft more bigger corporation, monopoly stuff, you gotta be concerned with that. I think even the government agency that manages rules for mergers and such had started to do a rewriting their rules after this announcement, so it's gonna be interesting to see if this deal actually goes through or if it gets stopped, but still, that is pretty impactful to at least talk about for a quick minute too. So, yeah, that's probably one of the biggest things that's happening in gaming and such. So, nevertheless, but what also happened is the formation of the Pauper format panel, I believe is how they pronounced it. Essentially, it's a group of Pauper community members as well as Gavin Verhey that essentially is going to look and manage the essentially balance as well as power level of the Pauper format. And one of the things they did recently as of this recording is they actually announced on January 20th what cards they were going to ban from the Pauper format. That's going to be essentially online. The bans will be online on MTG Online and formats essentially were available on the 21st. So specifically the cards that were banned were specifically ATOG, mostly because it's one of the more essential kind of like very silly cards in the Affinity decks. They also banned for Tron, Bonder's Ornament, as well as Prismatic Prism. I always get the name of this one. Prophetic Prism. Prophetic Prism also got banned as well. So, mostly they're using Bonder's Ornament and Prophetic Prism ban to try to affect Tron, more or less, just essentially to affect their color fit scene, since Tron can do very well with the color fit scene. ATOG is mostly just to knock Affinity down a peg. Honestly, I casually play the Pauper format. I wouldn't call myself essentially an expert in the format, though it is interesting to see a variety of content community creators take on this. Some people like the changes, some people are a little bit sad. For me, the only thing I could say is I'm a little bit sad about Prophetic Prism, since I did like doing the blinking shenanigans with Prophetic Prism to draw cards and such. But if I'm being legit honest, it makes perfect sense. The factor that they are wanting to target these cards and not like quick instant mana cards like Chromatic Star or Lotus Petal. Mostly just because those are just like quick bursts of mana, while these ones can consistently draw you cards as well as fix your mana. As they pointed out, it's kind of like the Arcanum's Astrolabe issue all over again, essentially, but with Tron. So, I'm not still professional enough in the format to actually say that that opinion will be like, how would I say it? I'm not experienced enough to know how impactful it will make to the format, but it will be very interesting to see how it does. Like, I have a lot of my Pauper associates have been talking about the changes. Some people love them, some people hate them. We'll definitely see what happens. Other than that, they also did announce a few other little details, essentially just the new secret layers of this year, which for those who have not been seeing it, they're essentially called the Astrology Lands. The basic Catch-22 premise for anyone who knows a little bit of astrology, they're basically stuff like Gemini, wow, I'm having a brain fart. Aquarius, essentially, as well as just essentially Wow, I can't believe I'm having a brain fart on this. Capricorn. Wow. Shows how much I know about astrology. Anyway, basically, they're going to have one with all the astrology signs, and they're going to release it as a year-in secret lair in a roundabout way, where basically the basic premise is you get to get these on the time when usually that astrological sign essentially starts. So, like, for example, the Aquarius one, usually their period is, like, starts around January 20th, so of course the Aquarius secret lair launched then, and it's kind of like goes with that with all the... I don't know, editor, do you want to just show, like, to the side here or there, kind of like how the astrology signs kind of like are related to their time in the month and the year and something like that? Basically, they're going to be timely secret lairs, but you do have a chance to get pretty much any of these until the end of the year. So, interesting take. It's not my cup of tea, though I do have to admit, I am curious to see what the Gemini is, since that's technically my astrology sign, I guess. And then I do like the Aquarius, because the art on it is actually legit gorgeous. But that's kind of my take on that. Other than that, the other thing that we know that essentially is coming out soon is that's basically their Catch-22 shtick of just the essentially combining both Crimson Vow and Midnight Hunt into a big draft type set. I really don't have any opinions on the draft format yet. I'm actually going to be drafting that actually starting tomorrow, just casually, just to see what it's like. So I'll definitely get my 2 cents on that, and we'll probably at least experience a little bit since it's also coming to Arena next week. So besides that, also, what else is coming next week? The start of Kamigawa Hype Season, which pretty much spoiler season starts next week, starting the 27th. Personally, I am very excited for what this set's going to bring. I have been seeing kind of like a lot of the story bits that they've been showing off, as well as kind of like the lore bits, which shows art that pretty much, more or less, without them saying it, but they are saying it, it does look like sagas are coming back, so that's kind of like cool to know that that mechanic's coming back, as well as ninjutsu. So that's awesome sauce. Nevertheless, it'll be very interesting. Also, one thing I will warn, there has been a few little leaks here and there. I would be very cautious with where you get your info, because there have been leaks been about, so not as many as some previous sets, but there is a few here and there, so just be cautious where you be cautious on. Also, they gave us an update that the following Tuesday, which is, I believe, the 25th, if my memory serves me correct. Yes, on the 25th, we're actually going to get an updated banned and restricted announcement. They did the Pauper one early just to celebrate the, essentially, the origination of this Pauper format panel group, essentially. But we are going to get a banned and restricted announcement on the 25th. It's going to be affecting multiple formats, as well as Standard and Alchemy, and potentially other formats. I don't know specifically, so I can't really say with strong word. All I know from their source, from their stream, was that it is going to affect multiple formats. So we're going to wait and see. I'll probably have a Twitter post telling my 2 cents on the bannings, or unbannings, or nerfs. It'll be interesting. They also gave us a little mini update about one of the main issues that have been talked about with essentially Arena and such, which is the current stance on the economy of Arena. They did actually give us a semi-update of when they're going to talk about that. Specifically, they're wanting to collect data from specifically Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, so they're going to wait a little bit after the century release of Kamigawa to have that official talking about the economy. As many people, as you could probably see from a lot, and I mean a lot, of content creators, they really want this to be addressed. It's been a constant issue topic in the community. I have seen constant Twitter posts, constant people in chat wanting to ask about this topic. So it will be interesting once a little bit with Kamigawa out and such. I don't know whether or not they're going to talk about it before or after the Alchemy release of Kamigawa. We'll wait and see. I'm going to guess sometime probably mid-March or early March is my guess. Nevertheless, it is good that they have that on their radar and they are going to talk about it. There is also the possibility that they're maybe taking this time to be able to collect data as well as develop plans of how they're going to move with the economy in the future. We'll wait and see. I'm curious and hoping for the best. Nevertheless, getting back to the banned and restricted announcements, there is some hunches of what I think is going to affect at least the Alchemy format, since due to the nature of the Alchemy format, it is going to be where there's going to be cards that either get banned or potentially nerfed. Mostly nerfed, though, because I think that's what they want to do with Alchemy. They want to try to make it where your cards are still playable in that format. As for what cards can have the potential to be targeted, we're actually now going to go to this next part. I recorded this one a little bit earlier in the week, so after this finger snap, you're going to see me in a little bit of more casual clothing with a casual kind of like tone, so to speak. So let's talk about cards that can have the potential of seeing nerfed within the Alchemy format this following Tuesday. As stated before, we're actually now going to go through some of the cards that came from Alchemy Innistrad, as well as the cards that have been rebalanced, and kind of like take my 2 cents on how I think they affect the meta, and there's any of them to keep an eye on for the potential rebalancing that's happening at the end of this month. So, nevertheless, let's actually talk about a few cards that I think, at least within each color pie, that I think needs to be kept an eye on, or at least might be potentially rebalanced. I think the main culprit and right that everybody was going to point to is Inquisitor Captain. This has been a ridiculously very powerful card, both in the Alchemy format as well as the Historic format. Just this versatility of this card is very silly, being able to get a lot of tempo-based free drops and such, like getting your Skyclave Apparitions, your Elite Spellbinder Mages, and there's even the combo where you can get this with the free drop of Rogue Clone and copy Inquisitor Captain again, and then just repeat the ETP again and again and again, just to build a board presence that is ridiculously absurd. Plus, there is also the factor that this can also synergize with cards that, since it's a cleric, that can synergize with cards like the Angel that essentially gets you gain life if a Angel or a human cleric, well, not a human cleric, any cleric, enters the battlefield and gains life. That can just cause a ridiculous amount of life gain, almost to the realms of 9s, 10s, 12s, and such. It can be very, very silly. So, I think if anything, if this card's going to get changed, it's either going to be upped on the mana cost, or potentially any effect of any of the cards that are around this combo, or even the potentially changing of the creature type from being maybe a human ranger or something like that. Because I do think the chaining synergy of this with the clerics, synergizing with stuff like essentially the free drop Angel and other cards within the meta, they kind of wanted Sigurd and Evangel to kind of do that shtick where you try to play multiple clerics and such, and then you get multiple cleric triggers. But realistically, the one that's been most popular is just Inquisitor Captain, because it constantly helps you to go wide very quick, and the Vigilance just a nice top. So, that's the first card I would say that would be kept an eye on for potential rebalance, as well as potentially Divine Purge. Mostly just because Azorius as well as Esper control decks have been taking mighty advantage of this card. It's been very, very good. Almost a little too good. Being able to have both the cost increase as well as the permanent entering the battlefield tap, that's a little bit much. There is a potential that this might get a cost increase or maybe affect permanents 4 or less or something along that lines. I think they're definitely going to try something along that approach, maybe to keep in balance of another card that we're going to be talking about in a quick second. So, let's first get to blue. For blue, really the one main kind of culprit card that everybody will be talking about is mostly the Discover the Formula. Mostly, you have to be very cautious, and with the Alchemy Innistrad set, they have provided a lot, and I mean a lot of cards that basically give you mana discount. And anyone who ever played any other card games, for example Hearthstone with Emperor Forsen, can know that mana cost reduction cards can be ridiculously powerful. And the fact that this not only seeks you non-free, non-land cards, as well as pretty much making your whole hand get the discount rather than the cards that you seek get the discount. This has been a mainstay piece in a lot of control-based decks in the Alchemy format. Just that mana discount can enable a lot of control, it enables a lot of combo decks. Being able to make a Hullbreaker Horde from going to a 7 mana cost card to be a 6 mana cost card, or less, ridiculously absurd. There's definitely the potential that this card might be altered at least a little bit. It's been doing a lot. It's cool to see this card, I'm not gonna lie. This is the one that I would be kind of sad for it to go kind of altered, because one thing about mana reduction, while it does enable some broken stuff, it can also enable some fun janky stuff. But I will admit, this is definitely a card that needs to be kept an eye on. But other than that, really not many blue cards I would say from Alchemy are needing to be altered at all. Maybe some upgraded. I guess some people will argue about Geist Channeler, but I think Geist Channeler is mostly, if it gets altered, it's more dying for the sins of discovering the formula rather than itself, because I think itself is perfectly fine, especially the factor that it only affects spells with mana value 3 or greater, so it has a limit to itself. It can't make spells cost 0 or less and do some silly shenanigans, though honestly, you could argue with this card and also with Discover the Formula that if it's going to be altered, it's more going to die to the sins of Lear, but that's more of a standard rebalance video, which I could get into a whole topic about some standard cards that really need to either get banned or with this new Alchemy system get altered. Lear being one of them. Some people would argue Hullbreaker Horror, but I'll be one of the more controversial people and say that I think Hullbreaker Horror is a perfectly fine card. It's just annoying in combination with Lear, if I'm being legit honest. But that's another story. As for the cards that got nerfed, Orange Epiphany, how much did it affect the meta in Alchemy? A little bit, actually. It turns out this card, not being able to get the birds when you get your extra turns, at least for the multiple copies with the Galvanic Iteration shenanigans, does affect the deck just a little bit. Like, you still see Izzet decks in the format and such. You definitely do see them. Some decks, especially decks that are running blue, mostly late game control decks, at least still running 2, maybe even 3 of these, because still getting the extra turn tempo, especially with some of the powerful spells that are in the meta, can be very good. Though, to be fair, you could make the argument that it's more getting overplaced by Time Warp, but we're going to get to that one shortly. For black cards, actually, for black cards for the most part have been relatively well balanced and kind of fun to play. With one exception to the rule, which, I mean, a lot of people will argue about Cursebound Rich to the fact that you can get the Cat Oven combo. But honestly, if I think there's the main culprit here that needs to be kept an eye on for a rebalance, it's probably Sanguine Brushstroke. It just does a little bit almost too much for free mana. Just being able to get a 2-cost unit that is also giving you a 1-cost enchantment that essentially whenever you sacrifice a blood token, you're going to lose life and gain life and then generate you the blood token. That's very silly. And then due to the fact of how the Conjurer mechanic works, the fact that the Blood Artist is going to go to your graveyard when it dies, that's very silly. I can almost see them potentially maybe making it where the Blood Artist gets exiled when it dies, or perpetually gains that ability where when it dies it gets exiled or such, because just the ability to reanimate this could be silly. Like, it's been proven to be very silly in these mono-black, kind of like Aristocrat decks. But if they still want to keep the spirit of the card, what's probably going to happen is probably just a mana adjustment, or maybe not generate a blood token or something along that lines. But it's definitely one that's been causing quite a bit of havoc within kind of like Aristocrat-based deck designs. Though, to be fair, at least now a lot of people are now starting to realize how really good Blood Artist was. Blood Artist, a very, very good card. Good for Commander, and also good for a lot of majority constructed formats, it turns out. So, yeah. Then we get to red, and I think everybody wants me to point to the one card that they will hope get adjusted, which is the Talonraiser Tyrant. Yes, we're going to talk about the Fearsome Whelp in a minute, but mostly the one is that a lot of people have been kind of like saying that might need to be potentially readjusted as Talonraiser Tyrant. A 4-mana 4/4, just the ETB ability on this, just making it where it has what basically amounts to being a Stone Rain effect, unless you do want to take the 2 points of damage, can be very, very, dare we say, punishing, especially if people can ramp this out on turn 3, which there's ways to definitely do that in the format. We're going to talk about one of the ways in there in a minute. But I could definitely see this being adjusted to whether the punishing effect maybe it just only deals a single point of damage, or maybe it just increasing the cost again. Like, it's hard because a lot of times I'm going to be recommending the cost increase potentially, mostly just because due to the way how Alchemy is formatted, just being able to have a lot of cost reduction cards. Such as Fearsome Whelp. Fearsome Whelp, there's a lot of people that's been wondering if this card needs to get nerfed or such. I think there's a potential to at least keep an eye on this card. I think one of the reasons why the card might potentially be problematic, like we all talk about how a lot of dragons get ramped up like Talonraiser Tyrant, want this to be, like, completely nerfed, if I'm being honest, because it does, for the most part, dragons, with the exception of, like, Is It Dragons in Standard for a little bit, which, really, honestly, it's just an Auron's Epiphany deck with just a lot more board presence, if we're being quite frankly honest. But, yeah, feels so well. It helped enable a lot of the more dragon deck designs, and we have a lot of cool dragons within the meta in general that really didn't see much play, and the fact that Fearsome Whelp is in the meta to help give the cost reduction does help the card a lot. It helps essentially a lot of dragon-based cards in the meta. It makes some of the fringe playable ones into more playable cards, with the only cost being that it makes the ones that are a little bit absurd, into probably more kind of busted level cards, let's just say. Nevertheless, though, I could see them potentially, seeing with how much flack this card gets, I could see them potentially just giving this like a, at the start of your step, at the beginning of your turn, rather than at the end step, so that people can respond to the card before you get the mana discount. And it still gets the effect where you're still going to get the semi-ramp still if you need to. Nevertheless, another card that really I'm not sure if it needs to be nerfed as more just changed is Rahilda. And the reason why Rahilda just needs a slight bit of a change is mostly due to the nature of the backside, which for those who don't know, the nature of its backside, it's actually a colorless card since it doesn't have a colorless identity. I don't think that's intentional, especially with the red border and all that stuff. Maybe it's intentional, but it does make it really tricky to play with one of the more popular removals in the meta, which is Vanishing Reverse, which then doesn't actually target Rahilda's backside. Maybe that was intentional design, though, to help keep Esper Control in check, which, as we've been seeing, Esper Control has been a very popular card, or not card, popular deck archetype within the meta and such, mostly because of one other card. Sheesh, I've been foreshadowing this one card. But yeah, Rahilda is definitely one that has the potential to just be changed so that both sides are the color identity red, but maybe they want to keep it intentionally colorless for the sake of just making it really hard to target with some of the more popular removal in the meta. Maybe. I don't know exactly, to be quite frankly honest. And also, with the nerf, we have Goldspan Dragon. Honestly, while the nerf did affect a lot of just essentially the more combo-oriented decks, as well as some of the temple decks, it actually is still a ridiculously good Magic card. Like, just the 5-mana ramp, the fact that you can get treasure, so you get mana, pretty much insurance from your flyer and such. Still a very good card. It still sees a play, especially in the Dragon's deck, because getting this discount at the 4 mana is just... yeah. So yeah, still, I don't think the nerf affected it much other than the fact that it more or less just got cut out of the more annoying, like, tempo-based as well combo decks. And I know a lot of combo players that do kind of miss the fact that you don't get the treasure when it gets targeted, especially for more, like, self-combo stuff. So there is a way to just throw a bone for those players, maybe make it where if you target it with a spell, you still get the mana cost. It still allows players who play kind of like the enchantment, kind of like Aura Runes packages and such, still get a little bit of reward for going that approach rather than, oh, I'm just going to play this dragon, oh, you're going to remove it, and I try to generate treasure from it. I'll generate the treasure and then just use it to feed my counterspell and such. So it would be kind of cool if this got a little bit buffed to, which sounds weird for me to say, to make it where you still get the treasure if you target it with your own spells, but maybe that's a little too much. We'll wait and see. Now green. Green, I'll be honest, I can't really think of any card that needs to be nerfed in green. Like, I know a lot of people think Tenacious Pup is a bit much, but honestly, Tenacious Pup is a perfectly balanced card, if I'm being legit honest with you. Yes, the fact that you can turn 1 this, turn 2 the pack leader, and then make it a 4/4 on turn 2 is a little bit silly. Don't get me wrong, but we do have ways to remove it for 2 mana. We have Thunderous Rebuke, we have a lot of ways, we even have Tempo in the meta, so this card is actually relatively fine in my book. Other than that, the only other card that I would say needs to be kept an eye on, I don't say it needs nerfed, but at least need to be kept an eye on, honestly, potentially maybe Settle the Wilds. And even then, I don't really think it needs nerf. I just think it's a card that once we get later into the meta and we get more cards in the library that are pretty much powerful mid to late game cards. This card gets a lot more powerful as a ramping option, especially for the factor that you can seek any land onto the battlefield tapped, which is very powerful. And just being able to put it into multicolored deck designs could be pretty silly. So this is a card that I would say need to at least be kept an eye on. I don't think it needs to be banned, or not banned, I don't think it needs to be nerfed, but it needs to be kept an eye on. Other than that, multicolor, honestly, oh wait, almost forgot to talk about the nerf card, Eska's Chariot. This is probably one of my favorite nerfs still of the bunch, because it still makes this card a little bit playable, just not busted playable. Like, you definitely see it being cut in most of the mono-green decks that pretty much exploited this card a lot, but you still see it in token-based strategies, and it's still nice to see this card at least be on fringe playable in token-based strategies. So, didn't totally kill the card, but at least it's not absurdly busted like it is in Standard. Now we get to the golden cards. I'll just get to the buffed card real quick. Great buff. I've been having fun playing this in the decks that I could play this deck card in. Just being able to encourage playing multiple basics and just being able to get all those plan tokens. And also just getting still a 6-mana 5/5 trample. Perfectly fine. Great. As well as the Omnath buff. Doesn't make it busted, but still, if you are going into a landfall deck design, it's still relatively a fun archetype to try out. Still maybe a little bit silly and historic, but not by much, if I'm being legit honest. As for the new cards itself, there wasn't that many new golden cards. Begin Anew, honestly, it's just been a card that's good if you're playing Band Control or even Celestia Control, potentially. Or even sometimes I've seen this in, like, Naya Werewolves, at least as a 1 or 2 of, but it's not, like, absolutely busted, as people thought, because the 2 green and 2 white is a little bit tricky. Gitrog, as many people know, I actually played a lot with this card with the Frogs 2 Alchemy deck tech, and this one's been perfectly fine as well, even with potential cost reduction shenanigans or ramping shenanigans that are currently in the Alchemy meta. This one, I think, will be perfectly fine. It's fun. I have a lot of fun playing it. It's perfectly fine card, and a fun card to at least add to your historic brawl decks, personally. Then we get to the lands. We talk about the nerf card for Faceless Haven. Faceless Haven, it definitely still sees play, but it's definitely not as annoying as its standard counterpart, I will say that. But you definitely still see play in the aggro decks, but it does keep the aggro decks a little bit more in check this time around, which is nice. It is also actually kind of nice how this card's now seeing more play in tribal-based decks now, since now people are taking more advantage of the tribal archetype changeling, rather than this just being more or less, oh, hey, this is just a 4/4 that I can just attack with when I pretty much survive the board wipe. Okay. So just like stuff like that and such. So just this nerf actually was perfectly fine, and it still makes the card still a pretty good card, especially if you're playing Snow. Forsaken Crossroads, really great land. Just pretty much anytime I play a multicolored deck design, I am very considerate of putting at least 2 to even a playset of these cards. Just the versatility of either having Scry or Untap if you're playing second gives you a great advantage if you're playing on the go rather than playing first. Very, very nice. And also the factor that it's a multicolored land that can just add 1 mana of any color you choose. Very, very nice. And now we get to colors. And I think everybody knows the card we're going to talk about. Key to the Archive. Ho ho ho! Yeah, this card has a very good chance of being slightly altered a little bit with the upcoming meta, because, upcoming balance changes, because, oh boy, you have seen a lot, and I mean a lot of control decks that pretty much basically amounts to control the board, play this, try to get a Time Warp, or try to get one of the powerful spells like Approach to the Second Sun and such, and then essentially use even stuff like pretty much Teleportation Circle to flicker it to get more of those spells, play like Teferi essentially so it can untap this and then just be able to hold the mana up for any of your control spells, plus in combination with Leer, this is a very gross card in the meta. So yeah, there's a very good chance that this might be altered. I will say, as much flack as this card gets, maybe even some rightful flack, I still kind of love this card if I'm going to be legit honest. I just love the factor that, one, if we go rotate a little bit with back to Strixhaven and such, I still remember one of the little mini complaints that people had with the Mystical Archives was the factor that, other than draft, you couldn't really play it in standard of any of the cards that are absurdly busted, essentially. Like, for example, the Demonic Turtles, the Approach of the Second Suns, the Time Warps of the World, and such. So giving people this at least short holiday season to even just this month being able to play with this card, and just be able to essentially, within a standard-like-ish meta, be able to play with the cards from the Mystical Archive, very flavorful. It was also a very good pick of all the Mystical Archive cards, majority of them. With maybe the exception of Time Warp might have been a little bit much. So I think if this is going to be altered any bit, it's probably just going to be what is going to be in its spell book a little bit. Maybe Time Warp be taken out for another card. Maybe I would say, I could see them doing something like maybe Blue Sun Zenith, probably replace it or something along that line. Maybe just something that is not, like, ridiculously absurd if you can copy it with Lear, as well as the Galvanic Iteration, etc., or even just an Esper Control, where mostly the only reason why people are playing Esper Control is mostly because it amounts to essentially a Zorius Control that can run Vanishing Verses as well as go for blank to essentially negate the opponent's graveyard so their Lear cannot be of much use. Did I mention that Lear might be needing a possible nerf? Besides that, though, let's talk about the buff card, which is Cosmo's Elixir. Honestly, this is a great buff for it for the Alchemy format. I've seen a lot of life game and even one of the more fairer controlled cards, essentially, for control decks and such. Just the incremental scry and life gain, perfectly fine, allows good for the life gain triggers. As for probably one of my favorite cards, probably Ominous Traveler. I just love the versatility of this card, as well as just essentially being able to play it in some more of the sillier deck designs that I've been trying. And this is one of the weird cards where I don't actually mind when it gets cost reduced. Because, you know, having a 0 mana Ominous Traveler that can get you any creature archetype of a variety of tribes, very, very hilarious, especially if you do like Maskwood Nets' shenanigans. So probably my favorite card. One I still need to play with, even though I don't really know much how good it is. It's probably Wickerween Effigy. Haven't played with this much, so I really can't make a honest opinion of whether it's good or bad, if I'm being like legit honest with y'all. And nevertheless, that is all the Alchemy as well rebalance cards, and kind of like my opinion of cards that need to at least be kept an eye on, or at the very, very, very least needs to essentially potentially be rebalanced, including some standard cards. Lear. Yeah, I'm going to be repeating that. Lear needs a rebalance, potentially. So, nevertheless, I hope you all had a lovely evening watching this. See y'all later. Bada beep, bada boop.